Flight Dreams, a Mark Manning mystery, Book 1. Author, Michael Kraft. Publisher, Open Road Integrated Media, New York. Narrator, Eric Ost. Saturday, October 24. 69 days till deadline. But I'll freeze my ass off, whines Roxanne. I don't give a damn, Manning tells her. You're not wearing that thing inside. I've got to hand it to you, Rox, says Neil from the back seat. You had a whole new dimension to the concept of politically incorrect. It turned cold last night. The first hard freeze of the season. Manning's car started grudgingly today when he left his apartment to pick up Roxanne and Neil for their trek to the cat show in the booming western suburbs. This weather won't last, but the morning is still frosty, even though the car is warm by now. Roxanne snuggles theatrically into the fulsome collar of a lavish lynx coat. She tells the men, I didn't know I was keeping company with animal rights activists. You're not, Manning assures her. But it strikes me as a tad insensitive to flaunt your feline fur among a bunch of cat lovers. On their own turf, no less. Ooga booga, grunts Neil in a low caveman voice. Great right huntress gird loins with cat pelts. Allowing herself to laugh at Neil's clowning, she accedes. All right, the coat stays, locked in the trunk, but I get to borrow one of your jackets for the run from the car to the building. Parking lots can be so nippy. Always the gentleman, Manning offers her at once. You can have mine. He fails to mention that the amphitheater has indoor parking, but he does mention the topic that has dominated their conversation for the last half hour. In return for this gallantry, may I assume that you agree to represent Arthur Mendel at the inquest? She pauses before answering. Very well, let me run it past my partners. I don't think they'll find a conflict of interest. But honestly, Mark, if I'm taking on a new client, it ought to be you. He breaks his steady driver's gaze to turn and look at her wide-eyed. Me? He asks. What'd I do? Nothing, I assume, she tells him calmly. But Humphrey Hastings. Roxanne. His eyes are fixed on the road again. It's bad enough that Hastings manipulates the media for the sake of some half-baked social agenda. Now he's trying to manipulate the judicial system as well. Yes, he has a form, but he's blowing smoke. There's no way he can turn his insinuations into substantiated charges. Neil says, Hasty may be a jerk, but he's a dangerous jerk, and I think you should heed Rox's advice and prepare for the worst, just to be safe. Manning falls silent, as if intent on his driving, but in fact, his mind is focused on Neil's warning, on the possibility that Hastings' contrivances could prove genuinely threatening. Manning's New Year's deadline is little more than 2 months away. If he's to save his job, salvage his career, he has his work cut out for him. The last thing he needs right now is the nuisance of fighting off trumped-up litigation. Roxanne and Neil's chit-chat lapses as the car banks into the curve of the exit ramp, with the amphitheater looming in the distance. Roxanne says, You've gotten kind of quiet, Mark. Tell us something about this cat show. Neil and I are new to the game. So am I, Manning reminds her. But I've done some research this week. Cat shows are held all over the country, all year round. Today's show is a big one. About 300 cats. Each show is sponsored by a specific cat club. There are many clubs in the Chicago area, and each is affiliated with one or more national organizations, of which there are 7 or 8. The club sponsoring today's show is affiliated with the Federated Cat Clubs of America, the FCCA. Remember, is named as one of the heirs to the Carter estate, and I wouldn't be surprised to find Margaret O'Connor here with some of her Abyssinians. Neil asks, Will the animals be paraded? No, says Manning. It's not at all like a dog show. The FCCA maintains standards for each breed, and they train and certify judges for the shows. The cats are appraised solely as specimens. Behavior is irrelevant, and the judges don't let an animal's personality color its evaluation. Sounds kind of dull, Roxanne tells him. Is there anything in particular you're hoping to learn? Manning thinks for a moment. I've been trying for nearly 7 years to figure out what makes Helena Carter tick. These shows were a big part of her life, and I've never been to one. It's time to correct that. Also, it's a good excuse for the three of us to get together before Neil flies home tomorrow. A loaded silence falls over the car, and Manny wishes he had not mentioned Neil's departure. The early return to Phoenix has been prompted by a web of emotions that confuses and frustrates all three of them. I had my doubts, said Neil, breaking the tension. But this whole cat show business is starting to sound interesting. I wish I knew more about the breeds, but then this is probably the best way to learn. The car plunges into the dark tunnel that leads to the parking garage. Roxanne removes her big Jackie-style sunglasses as her eyes adjust to the indoor lighting. She tells Manning, I might have known. While I appreciate the chivalrous offer of your jacket, I thought it came too quickly. It is nearly noon, and the show is well underway, so the lot is almost full. Many of the parking spaces are occupied by vans with out-of-state plates, driven there by breeders with their cats, cages, and exhibit paraphernalia. Manny finds a spot, helps Roxanne stow the links in the trunk, and removes his sport coat, which she dons like a cape, its arms hanging limp. Neil cracks. Broad shoulders become you rocks. Grinning, she assumes the lead to the elevators and swaggers off, a la Joan Crawford, heels snapping at the cement floor. The threesome enters the hall, paying admission in the lobby. Each gets the back of one hand rubber stamped with a paw print. That allows its wearers to leave and return without paying again. Manning buys a copy of the show catalog, a daunting booklet of computer-printed list, and gives it to Neil, asking him to try to figure it out. Roxanne sneezes. The exhibit hall itself is a single vast room, a utilitarian space with no pretense of decor. The main expanse of its floor is set up with row after row of numbered tabletop cages. Neil notices that these exhibit numbers are also found in the catalog, which lists each cat by lineage, owner, and breeder. The people who are showing the animals stand near the cages or sit on lawn chairs. Some listen to radios. Some drink or eat. Others groom their cats or fuss with cutesy decorations within the cages. The general confusion is compounded by the constant milling of spectators up and down the aisles. The animals make little, if any, noise, and the room is surprisingly odorless. For a space containing 300 cats, Roxanne sneezes again. Along the far wall are 5 judging rings. Not really rings at all, but called that by tradition. Each consists of a long judging table with a raised platform at its center. In back of the table are about a dozen numbered cages. In front are 2 rows of folding chairs to accommodate onlookers. A droning loudspeaker calls cats by breed and number to each of the rings. Each cat will eventually be seen by all judges. Owners and breeders whisk cats in their arms from the cages in the aisles to the cages in the rings, announcing, "Cat coming through," parting the crowds. Again, Roxanne sneezes, this time with a blast that makes her nose drip. "Are you okay?" asks Manny, remembering Roxanne's history of allergies. "Do cats bother you?" "Afraid so," she answers, fingering a blurry gum from the corner of one eye. "But I brought my pills. I'll be shipshape in a minute. Excuse me," she says, taking her leave, wandering off in search of a ladies' room. Neil tells Manning, "Rox never mentioned that she was allergic to cats. Why on earth would she want to come here?" "Because we're here," Manning says without comment. Neil nods, enlightened. The loudspeaker dryly calls the numbers of 7 Abyssinians to one of the rings for judging. "Come on," says Manning, jerking his head in the direction of the ring. "I'd like to see this." They jostle through the crowd and arrive at the judging area as the owners deposit their paged Abyssinians into the numbered cages. The 2 rows of chairs are already filled, so Manning and Neil stand. The judge, Mrs. Ripley, is a buxom lady with stiff silver hair. She chats with her 2 assistants, a young man and woman who sort through a pile of carbon forms that will record the results of the judging. Ribbons of different colors and sizes are arrayed along the front edge of the table. Manning assumes that these ribbons will be awarded throughout the weekend show. There are seemingly far too many for the 7 cats now assembled. What utterly beautiful animals, Neil says, sotto voce to Manning, beguiled by the cats. With cats, spectators, and carbon forms assembled, the judging begins. Mrs. Ripley goes to the first cage, opens its door, and pulls out the cat. She holds it like a big sausage, one hand between its forelegs, the other grasping its hindquarters. Manning has never seen a cat held this way, but the animal doesn't mind. In fact, it seems content and docile. The matronly woman looks into the cat's eyes, coos at it, then clutches it affectionately to her chest, the way any layman would hold a cat. She places it on the little platform in the center of the table. A gooseneck lamp shines on the animal at close range. Still holding the cat with both hands, Mrs. Ripley runs her fingers through the fur, examining the quality of the coat as she parts it to reveal the vivid apricot of the undercoat near the skin. When satisfied that the animal will not bolt, the judge lets it stand freely on the platform. Displaying its stance, its conformity to type, she picks up a peacock feather and waggles it before the cat, with eyes following it alertly. The animal paws and snaps at the gaudy plume. The judge again picks up the cat in a strained sausage hold, displaying the animal at different angles to herself and to the onlookers. She deposits the cat back into its cage and returns to the table, where she makes a few brief notes on one of the forms. Without comment, she plucks a ribbon from the table and hangs it on the cat's cage. There is no discernible reaction. From those watching, Mrs. Ripley spritzes her hands in the platform with disinfectant, wipes up with paper towels, then goes to the second cage and begins again. Manning and Neil look at each other with quizzical glances. The judge works her way through all 7 cats, exhausting the supply of ribbons, while her clerks record the results. Some cats receive as many as 3 ribbons, 2 receive none. Occasionally, Mrs. Ripley chuckles with her audience when one of the animals engages in some antic or another, but the whole proceeding is otherwise carried out in silence. Finally, one of the clerks announces, "The Abbeys can return now," and their owners step forward to retrieve their cats and booty. Manning and Neil are about to leave in search of Roxanne when Manning notices Margaret O'Connor rising from her seat in the front row. "Margaret," calls Manning, "I wondered if I'd see you here." "Why, Mark," she says, bustling toward him, "I didn't think for a minute that I'd see you here." After introducing Neil, Manning says, "You got me interested in Abbeys, so I wanted to check out your competition. Are you showing today?" "I brought a pair of kittens, but I'm also here to see old friends. One in particular." She crosses her arms in a satisfied pose. "Timothy Chapman, president of the FCCA," she says in a tone intended to impress. In response to Manning's inquisitive gaze, she explains, "Timothy Chapman is one of the country's most respected authorities on abbeys. He consulted with Helen often during the early years of her breeding program, and then went on to write the Federation's Abyssinian Standard, largely on the basis of Helen's cats. He's here to judge the finals, which is a real honor for the club. I'll introduce you later if you like. He's over in ring 5. Manning peers across the room toward the last judging ring. Through the bobbing heads, he can see a figure who he assumes to be Chapman. He tells Margaret, "I'd like that very much, but first, why don't you show Neil and me your kittens?" "I thought you'd never ask," she says with a playful smile, leading the 2 men down a nearby aisle. As they approach the cage that houses Margaret's kittens, Manning is surprised to see Roxanne already standing there, peeping at the animals while checking details in her own copy of the show catalog, which she must have bought while returning from the restroom. He tells her, "I see you're one step ahead of us." "Mark," says Roxanne, turning, "look who's here today." She points to the cage with one hand and holds out the open catalog with the other. "These are Carter's sister's cats." "And this," says Manning, ushering Margaret forward, "is Carter's sister." Roxanne blushes, stifling a laugh, while Manning introduces her to Margaret O'Connor. "That a girl," Margaret tells her. "I'm glad to see you know how to use your catalog. Want to meet my babies?" "Of course," Roxanne answers, mustering a show of enthusiasm to offset an allergy-inspired weariness. She traces her index finger down a page of the book. "Let's see. she says, all business. One is Carter Cat Abby Albert, and the other is Carter Cat Abby Abbott. They're 5 months old. That's right, says Margaret, opening the cage, but we just call them Al and Abbott. The long titles are their registered names. Carter Cat Abby is our cattery prefix. Here we go. She pulls one of the kittens from the cage and hands it to Roxanne. This is Abbott. Roxanne holds the kitten awkwardly at arm's length. Margaret coaxes the other kitten from the cage and hands it to Neil. This is Brother Al. Hello, baby Al, Neil tells the kitten with a delighted paternal grin that surprises Roxanne. You're bringing home lots of ribbons this weekend. The little cat looks at him with sleepy gold eyes purring in the nest of his hands. Al's ears are enormous. His coat glistens. His body is lithe and long as a minx. I'd say you've got a little champion here, Neil tells Margaret, while trying out Mrs. Ripley's sausage hold on Al. The kitten's cage already sports an impressive variety of awards. Manning says, I'm confused, Margaret. What do all these ribbons mean? In the judging we watched, it looked like everyone won. Some of them several times over. Margaret laughs. The ribbons always confuse newcomers. You see, of the 7 Abbeys you watched, 6 were Reddies, and 1 was a Red. The colors are judged separately. Of the Reddies, 4 were Toms, and the other 2 Queens. They're judged separately, too. So a cat can place for a best breed, color, or sex as a first, second, or third. But the only award that really counts is this one, she says, fingering a bunting striped ribbon that hangs among the others on Al and Abbott's cage. This is a winner's ribbon. A judge can award it to any particularly fine specimen in the FCCA. A cat's status is determined by how many winner's ribbons the animal accumulates from show to show. Before a cat receives one of these, it's called a novice. After the cat gets its first winner's ribbon, it's known as an open. 4 ribbons make it a champion. 16 a grand champion. 4 times 16 a quad grand, and so on. Few cats get that far, only those that are seriously campaigned by their breeders. Abe, one of the cats that disappeared with Helen, was a champion many, many times over. Abe was the greatest Abbey on record. Who got this winner's ribbon? Asked Manny. Al or Abbott? That one went to Abbott. Neil says to the cat in his hands, It must have been rigged, Al. We'd better demand a recount. Don't worry about Al, says Margaret. He'll do just fine. These kids have 4 judges left. She puts the kittens back into their cage, where they curl into a single ball of ruddy-colored fur. Then she suggests, why don't you folks make yourselves at home and take in the rest of the show? I'm going to track down some missing friends. But don't forget, Mark, I'd like for you to meet Timothy Chapman later. I won't forget, he assures her as she trundles off in search of old acquaintances. Neil tells Manning and Roxanne, let's work our way up and down each aisle. That way we'll be sure to see everything. As the 3 of them begin strolling past the first row of cages, Manning remembers Roxanne's attack of sneezes. How are you feeling? He asks her. Much better, thanks. I took a double dose of starters. My trusty antihistamines never fail me. She pats her purse. Manning thinks it's risky to tamper with the dosage of a potent drug, but he keeps the opinion to himself, unsure of Roxanne's mood today. Besides, what's done is done. As they round a corner and begin to plod through the crowd in another aisle, Neil stops in his tracks. Mark, look, he says, pointing to the back of a rotund man leaning forward to fuss within a cage. Manning and Roxanne stare incredulously. Gapping back at them is a corpulent rump, sheathed in burgundy polyester. Roxanne, now pointing too, squeals, It's the hump! Humphrey Hastings does not hear her over the din of the exhibit hall. He continues fussing with something in the cage. My God, gasped Manning, perturbed. What the hell is he doing here? I wonder if he's on to something. Just look at him, snooping around like he owns the place. Relax, Mark, says Roxanne, holding forth an open page of the catalog. Believe it or not, Hastings is here to exhibit a cat. See? She points to an entry on the page. He's showing a Blue Point Himalayan. What's that? Manning asks testily. Roxanne states the obvious. One way to find out. Manning doesn't relish the ideal, but admits, I suppose it would be childish not to say hello. Neil tells him, I really dislike that man. I'll just keep my distance. Oh, no, you won't, kiddo, Manning chides him. We're all in this together. He motions for the others to follow as he steps up behind Hastings, as if taken by surprise. At the very moment, he says, Well, Humphrey Hastings, what a small world. Hastings gaps at them, astonished. Why, Manning, he stammers. Of all people. He breaks into a sweat, wondering whether Manning heard his accusations on the radio a few days ago. And then, recognizing Roxanne. Mrs. Exner, so nice to see you again. And your college friend, Mr. Waite, I believe. Do you attend these shows often? No, Roxanne answers for the group. But we see that you do. She gestures with the catalog toward Hastings' exhibit. Hastings presumes he is off the hook. The color returns to his face as he waxes rapturous. Let us leave all animosity at the door, my friends, lest we forget our sacred fraternal bonding within the cat fancy. Yes, Fluff Budget and I have been entering all the local shows for years now. He taps the cage lovingly. Of course, she never wins anything, but we just keep trying. And I do enjoy the fellowship of the club. In fact, he adds, squaring his shoulders with pride, my increasing involvement with the Federation has recently led me a board position. I am National Secretary of the FCCA. Something of a tedious honor, I admit, but it does make good use of my note-taking skills. His voice becomes suddenly indignant. If those damn judges had any taste at all, Fluff would be a grand champion by now. Then, sliding again into sweetness, Isn't that right, darling? The cat is aptly named. A breathing mound of off-white fur, its face and paws tipped with the cool gray known to cat fanciers as blue. It was a flat face with a punched-in snout and glistening black pellets for eyes. Fluff Budget's cage is truly a home sweet home away from home, as attested to by a florid needlepoint sampler hanging on the back wall. Hastings proudly points out that they've won the award for Best Decorated Cage at every show they've entered. In the center of the cage is a cat-sized four-poster bed of real brass. Its canopy and dust ruffle are of fine lace, its bedspread and pillows of smoky blue velvet that accentuates Fluff Budget's points. The front of the cage is framed by matching velvet curtains, tied back with tasseled silk cords. The cat will not go near the bed, but sits instead with a surly expression in its litter tray. And he wonders if the cat prefers to sit among its droppings, or if Hastings has trained the shedding animal to keep off the velvet bedspread. Come on, darling, Hastings baby talks the cat while opening the cage. Let's come out and show off our beautiful fur coat. As Hastings yanks the disgruntled animal from its litter tray, Fluff Budget opens her mouth to meow in protest, but nothing comes out. Hastings displays the cat, holding it in his arms like a muff. Isn't she a sweetheart? My, yes, Roxanne obliges. That's quite an animal, says Manning, unwilling to be more specific. She certainly is, Hastings agrees, nuzzling Fluff Budget nose to nose. The cat tries to back off, seemingly embarrassed by its owner's affection. She's due for another grooming, adds Hastings, fingering the fur with a touch that suggests it needs a bit of work. It won't be long till her next judging. He picks up a long-toothed metal comb and sets to the task of raking out the Himalayan. Good luck, Hastings, says Manning as he, Neil, and Roxanne begin to wander further down the aisle. We'll be rooting for Fluff Budget, adds Neil. Thank you all, says Hastings. Enjoy the show. Remembering something, Manning halts and turns back to tell Hastings, by the way, enjoyed your performance on Bud Skirkham's program Tuesday morning. At the mention of the radio show, Hastings hits a snag in Fluff Budget's coat. The cat bares its teeth and hisses at Hastings, who raps the cat's head with the comb and hisses back at it. Little bitch! As soon as they are out of earshot, Neil tells his friends, I don't know how he can stand to touch that beast. Did you see the oft turned up expression on its face? It looks like it just smelled a fart. And I think I just smelled a rat, says Manning. Hastings is on the board of the FCCA. His campaign to bring Arthur Mendel to justice is apparently less than altruistic. Roxanne laughs. No idea what any of you smelled, but after all that combing, I smell cat dander, which can be lethal. She snaps open her purse, extracts a dose of preventative medicine, and pops the pill into her mouth, swallowing without water. Neil warns her, Those on candy rocks. Then he tells Manning, I think we should get her out of here. I agree, says Manning, but I really ought to find Timothy Chapman before we go. Tell you what, you guys browse around while I go look for him. When I'm finished, we can go out for an early, leisurely supper. I know a place that makes the most incredible stuffed pizza. It's something you should try, Neil, while you're still in Chicago. Sounds good to me, says Neil. We've missed lunch, and I'm starved. Roxanne agrees to the plan as well, so Manny walks off in search of Chapman, deciding it might be quickest to ask Margaret O'Connor where to find him. Heading toward the area of Al and Abbott's cage, he sees Margaret gabbing with an aging, distinguished man who wears a tuxedo, looking absurdly out of place. Margaret spots Manning and waves him forward. Mark, she says, what a coincidence. We were just going off to find you. This is Timothy Chapman, president of the FCCA. The two men exchange pleasantries. Then Manning says, You're looking very dapper for this crowd, Mr. Chapman. He would not normally mention someone's being overdressed, but the sartorial excess is so blatant that it seems intended to invite comment. Chapman chuckles. I suppose I do overdo it, Mr. Manning, but the club gets a kick out of it in light of my esteemed position, he quips. Besides, it's about the only chance I have to get dressed up these days. Not many of my friends are getting married anymore. He smiles pensively, a wistful expression that dwells for an instant on lost youth. As they review some of the details of Chapman's relationship to Helena Carter, Manning considers that Chapman has a vested interest in the resolution of the mystery. His organization stands to inherit millions under the terms of Carter's will, which colors their conversation with new shades of meaning, with possible undertones, with motives for deception. Manning remembers his talk with Father Matthew Carey 2 weeks earlier. The priest was eyeing the prize, was not what he seemed, was not to be trusted. Yet this man, Timothy Chapman, is sincere, decides Manning. His judgment is confirmed when the old gentleman wishes Manning luck in finding the heiress and bringing her back. Manning observes, You still think of her as a friend? Indeed I do. I know her when she first started breeding abbeys, which I've always been partial to. Helena Carter's work advanced the breed beyond anyone's expectations. Manning pauses a moment before asking, Do you think of Humphrey Hastings as a friend? Chapman also pauses, unprepared for the question, then laughs. Our new secretary is an avid enthusiast of the cat fancy, but he's a rather unusual person. No, I can't say that I count him among my friends. He's certainly proven himself a friend of the Federation, however, and I believe he must have been very friendly with Helena Carter. It was he who convinced her to include the Federation in the planned giving of her will. Really? The conversation has revealed more than Manning expected, so he discreetly digs his pen and notebook from a pocket. In fact, says Chapman, his timing was fortuitous, at least from a mercenary standpoint. Shortly after she added the Federation's codicil, she disappeared. Trying to mask the significance he attaches to this new detail, Manning shifts the conversation, asking, Since her disappearance, have you noticed any difference in the quality of abbeys being shown? Indeed. The breed has slipped appreciably, and it's apparent to eyes less critical than mine. Good heavens, Helena Carter bred the cats against which all other Abyssinians are judged. When she disappeared, Abe and Eve with her, the only possible consequence was that future Abbeys would suffer. It's so disheartening, traveling around the country as I do, judging cats that represent the finest efforts of earnest breeders, only to find that my favorite breed has actually lost ground in our quest to produce the perfect cat. Manning glances up from his notes and sees tears beginning to well in Chapman's eyes. The old man clears his throat and continues. There's reason for cautious optimism, though. In the past year or two, some extremely fine specimens have been popping up in odd places all over the Southwest. Last month, for instance, I was judging a show in Albuquerque and came across a wonderful Abbey kitten entered in the household pet category, which means that the cat was neither registered nor pedigreed. A cat without a known ancestry is of no use in terms of advancing the breed, so I talked to the kitten's owner, and he knew nothing of where the cat came from. It was a gift from a friend of a friend or whatever. And what's curious, Mr. Manning, is that every time I encounter one of these magnificent animals, I get the same story. Chapman ponders the dilemma for a moment, then concludes, It's horribly frustrating. By late afternoon, Manning, Neil, and Roxanne are settling into a dimly lit booth at the Italian restaurant where Manning is a fan of the stuffed pizza. Although they parked only a block away, Roxanne insisted on wearing her lynx coat from the car to the door. Once inside, she found no secure place to check the fur, so she asked the manager to keep it for her in his office. But her huffy manner made no points with the man, and she now struggles to roll the coat into a ball next to her in the booth. Though Manning was annoyed by the scene she created, he is pleased by the result. He and Neil are seated cozily next to each other, across the table from Roxanne and her lynx. A waiter with an accent introduces himself as Gino, but Manning has a hunch it's an act. They're all in the mood for a drink. Manning and Neil order their usual straight vodka. Roxanne, claiming the need to ward off a chill, orders grappa and a heated snifter. I want the good stuff, she cautions the waiter, not that Italian gasoline. Gino nods his understanding and turns to go, but Roxanne calls him back. And a bottle of Chianti for the table. Let's get this party rolling, gentlemen. Once the drinks arrive, the wine hasn't appeared yet, presumably being held for dinner. Neil asks, Well, Mark, did you glean the background you wanted from the cat show? More than I bargained for, says Manning. Humphrey Hastings' history of involvement with the FCCA took me totally off guard. I'm not sure what to make of it, but it's a whole new twist I'll need to look into. Roxanne swirls the snifter between her hands, telling Manning, It seems you've uncovered quite a few new twists to this story. When you first told me about your predicament 3 weeks ago, you said that even though there was no known evidence of murder, you first had to satisfy yourself that any possible suspects had no involvement in Mrs. Carter's disappearance. You called it grunt work. Has it paid off? Not exactly. Manning's pensive tone is laced with understatement. Even though there's still no hard evidence to convince me that Helena Carter was murdered, my investigation has raised more questions than it has answered. Such as? Asked Manning. First, says Manning, why did Arthur Mendel and Margaret O'Connor order God knows how many cubic yards of concrete poured on the grounds of the estate in the middle of winter, within a week of Mrs. Carter's disappearance? That's suspicious enough in itself. But get this. Arthur once had gambling problems with the underworld of the horsey set, and Margaret had fears of being cut out of her sister's will because of a sexual dalliance she'd had with Ridgely Carter. Ouch, says Roxanne. She slurps a mouthful of grappa, swallowing hard. Ouch is right, says Manning. But the plot, as they say, thickens. Let's say, for the moment, for the sake of argument, that Mrs. Carter was murdered. What would be the motive? The most obvious, of course, is money. So, who has the most to gain? The Archdiocese of Chicago will be the big winner, and to a lesser extent the Federated Cat Clubs. So we can cast suspicions, glances at Archbishop Benedict or any of his minions. Father Matthew Carey, for instance, whom I caught in a lie regarding a minor point of Helen and Margaret's family history. Or, if it's the cat folk who have blood on their hands, we should question the motives of Timothy Chapman, president of the FCCA, or even Humphrey Hastings, who's nutty enough that his involvement just might be plausible. Christ, says Neil, shaking his head as if to clear his thoughts. That's a lot of loose ends. You've been led down a dozen different paths. There's nothing to tie them together. But there is. Manning crosses his arms. Uh-oh, says Roxanne. Manning tells him. Nathan Kane, revered publisher of the journal, seems to know everyone. And in fact, he's had recent conversation with nearly everyone I've talked to. It's as if there's a network of interrelated motives at work. A conspiracy. If that's the case, it provides an explanation for Kane's bizarre ultimatum to me, which seemed fickle at best. Or maybe the ultimatum simply was fickle. The flexing of a powerful man's ego. No explanation required. He pauses to sip his vodka, swallows, exhales. I'm stumped. Roxanne starts to tell him. You really opened a can of... But she stops short. Sensing an impending sneeze, she lifts a finger to her nose. And the threat passes. Worms, she says. Finishing the thought, she raises her snifter to drink from it. And now the sneeze hits. Right into the glass, spraying her face with grappa. The guys can't help laughing. Bless you, blurts Neil. Sorry, says Manning, trying to compose a straight face. Roxanne dabs with her napkin, but needs a mirror and better light. Excuse me, she says, rising, purse in hand. Before leaving, she asks, you'll keep an eye on Kitty? The links will be fine, Neil assures her, and she's off to the ladies' room. Neil turns his head to face Manning. He grins. I thought she'd never leave. Under the table, he moves his leg so that his knee rests against Manning's. The move is deliberate and unambiguous. While the situation reminds Manning of his recent encounter with Father Carey, there are no mind games being played today. What's happening under the table is natural and appropriate. Not devious or coy. Manning responds by shifting his own leg closer to Neil's. They touch from ankle to knee. Manning tells him, I hope she's not downing more antihistamines. Even as we speak, I'm sure. Neil. Manning starts a sentence without knowing its course. Yes. Manning puts his hand on Neil's knee. He tells him, I wish you weren't going back to Phoenix tomorrow. I don't want to go, says Neil, putting his hand on Manning's. But the tension with Rox is just too much for now. We need some serious distance between us. Manning is tempted to say, why don't you stay with me? That would get you out of our hair. You could finish up your work here as planned, and we'd have time to weigh more fully the issues we've already broached. He wants to say all that, but the words stick in his throat. Instead, he asks, can I give you a ride to the airport tomorrow? That's such a hassle for you, Mark. I could take a cab. Manning places his other hand, his free hand, on top of Neil's under the table. He gives a squeeze. It's no trouble. I'd really like to do it. Fine, then great. Roxanne returns from her self-ministrations and sits in the booth. Without speaking, she smiles at Manning and Neil, observing the angle of their arms which disappear beneath the table. She touches the rim of her snifter and tips it toward her, peering inside to confirm that it is empty. Prego, she snaps at the nearest waiter. Not Gino, but a waspy blonde college kid named Spencer. Where the hell's our Chiante? A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.